My dad didn't just raise his voice that night. He stripped me bare with 14 words. All you do is take. You've never given this family anything. Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you had any pride left, you'd leave." So I did. I packed one bag, shut off every payment I'd been making for years, and disappeared. A month later, my sister called, crying, begging to know why her tuition hadn't gone through. I stared at her message for a long time before replying. Thought I never gave this family anything. That was the moment I realized love in my house had always been a transaction, one I could no longer afford to keep paying. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes knowing someone's listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel. It's free, but it helps stories like mine find the people who need to hear them most. Those who've given too much and are finally learning how to stop. My name is Ethan Walker, and this is how silence became the only thing I had left to give. Thanksgiving in Minneapolis always carried the kind of gray light that made everything look cleaner than it really was. The skyline outside my loft shimmered under a cold afternoon sun, the glass towers reflecting a city that had no idea how exhausted I felt. Inside the dining table, stretched across the open kitchen, a 10-seater of polished oak surrounded by laughter that never quite included me. I'd paid for every detail of this meal. The catering, the floral centerpiece, the hired cleaning crew waiting downstairs. Even the wine glasses had come from a boutique shop my mother once admired, but claimed she could never afford. They all arrived exactly on time, as if punctuality could disguise how much they depended on me. My father, Martin Walker, gave my apartment a quick, critical scan before muttering, "Nice place, son. Guess it's easier when life hands you opportunities." My mother, Diane Walker, followed behind him, handing me a pie she didn't bake, smiling as though the act alone made her nurturing. Zach, my older brother, still carried the swagger of a man who peaked in high school football. He slapped my back and said, "Man, family always comes through right, a toast." Later in the night would echo those same words. Maya, my little sister, glided in with the weightless self-confidence of someone who'd never paid her own rent. She barely looked up from her phone, talking about USC's art studio fees and asking, half-joking, if I could handle another semester's surprise increase. I could, and I had been for years. Zach's truck payments, Maya's tuition, my parents' roof repairs and heating system, even their long-delayed kitchen remodel. Every bill came to me disguised as a favor wrapped in the word family. In my phone, I'd even labeled the autopay accounts like inside jokes: Zach Wheels, Maya, Tuition Home, HVAC. They sounded funny until I saw the total drain from my balance. Each month I used to tell myself it was love. That night it just felt like obligation and holiday wrapping. When dinner started, Zach raised his glass and declared to the Walkers, "No matter what happens, family always has each other's back." Everyone clapped. Nobody mentioned who had paid for the entire thing. My father, Martin Walker, took the opportunity to tell a long story about how things were tougher in my day. How kids now think money grows on trees. Each time his gaze brushed mine, I felt that familiar burn of unspoken criticism. The way he said "kids" when he really meant you. I laughed where it was polite to laugh. I nodded when my mother, Diane Walker, whispered, "Don't bring up money, dear. Not tonight." Maya scrolled through her phone, showing everyone photos of a new installation at her campus studio. They raised the material fees again. She sighed, then looked straight at me with a half-smile. "Hope my favorite brother still got my back?" The room chuckled. I didn't. After dessert, they migrated to the living area full of warm light and fake nostalgia. I stayed behind in the kitchen, scraping plates into the trash, the scent of gravy and detergent mixing into something oddly metallic. I could hear Zach's voice from the couch, loud and effortless the way people sound when they've never worried about bills. My father's laughter rose above the rest, proud, heavy, dominant. That's when Olivia arrived, my cousin, the only one who ever saw through the family script. She stepped into the kitchen, glanced at the stacked plates, and said softly, "You're still the last one standing at the sink, huh?" I smiled without answering. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead handed me a container of cranberry sauce and joined the others. A gust of wind slipped through the slightly open window and flickered the candle at the center of the table. Instinctively, I cupped my hand around the flame to protect it, then let it die out. The smell of smoke curled upward, faint but sharp. I turned toward the living room. My family was a collection of silhouettes against the glow of the fireplace, laughing perfectly unaware that I was already somewhere else in my head. On the shelf by the hallway, a framed Christmas photo caught my eye. The whole family in matching sweaters, my space neatly cropped out before they posted it online last year. The frame had a fine layer of dust on it. "Family doesn't abandon family," my mother had said when I once hesitated to cover another expense. I'd believed her then. Later, after everyone left, the apartment was too quiet. I washed the last glass, dried my hands, and looked out the tall window over the tracks behind my building. A train screamed through sparks, flashing against the rails. My phone vibrated on the counter, my father's number, a missed call, and a voicemail I hadn't opened. I stared at it until the screen went dark. I didn't press play. Not yet. 3 weeks later, the cold had settled into Minneapolis like it planned to stay forever. That Tuesday night, the city lights outside my window blurred in the rain, turning the skyline into streaks of orange and silver. I sat alone in the kitchen, the blue glow from the under-cabinet light painting everything sterile. My phone blinked again with that same unopened voicemail. I finally pressed play. "All you do is take," my father's voice snapped through the speaker. "You've never given this family anything worth remembering. If you had any pride left, you'd leave." There was a pause at the end, a faint exhale, as if he felt lighter for saying it. I played it again and again. By the third time, something inside me flipped like a breaker. No anger, no tears, just a clean click between who I was and who I refused to be anymore. I opened my banking app. One by one, I scrolled through the list. Zach Wheels Maya Tuition Home HVAC Utilities Parents. Tap, tap, tap. Paused. The silence after each confirmation was almost musical. Next, I went to the safe under my desk and pulled out the folder of receipts and legal documents. The title to the Silver Lake house, the same family investment I'd paid off but never used. I slipped everything into a plain envelope and labeled it in black ink. Receipts only. Then I packed a single suitcase, a few shirts, my laptop, my passport. Nothing sentimental. On the counter, I left a sealed envelope with my spare keys for Olivia, no note attached. When I checked my email for flight confirmations, another message caught my eye. Correspondence from the property insurance office at Silver Lake. Months ago, my father had tried to add his name as primary contact for maintenance updates. The request had been denied. I stared at the rejection letter, realizing it wasn't just an administrative error. It was a quiet attempt to claim what I'd paid for. They were preparing to turn emotional leverage into ownership. Then came the second blow. An old family iPad I kept for music pinged with a cloud sync I hadn't turned off. The messages appeared like ghosts, a group chat titled Family Only. Zach had written, "He'll come crawling back. Who else is going to pay the bills?" My mother replied with a heart emoji. My father's response, "He owes us." I turned off the screen. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't need proof of betrayal. The only evidence I wanted was the kind that counted in court and in conscience paper trails, signatures, receipts. The Silver Lake house key in my hand was nicked at the corner, the metal worn from years of use. I ran my thumb across it once before slipping it into the same envelope. The label stared back at me. Receipts only. Outside, another train screamed by, echoing through the damp air. I zipped the suitcase, put on my coat, and paused by the kitchen light switch. For a second, I looked around at the apartment. the polished table the faint outline of where the candle had burned out, the ghost of that Thanksgiving evening still hovering in the air. Then I switched off the lights. The city went silent, except for the rails humming in the distance. I pulled the door closed behind me and didn't look back. The first night after leaving Minneapolis, I pulled into a roadside motel somewhere in Iowa. The neon sign buzzed like a dying fly, and the room smelled of bleach and old coffee. I dropped my suitcase by the door, turned off my phone, and lay on the stiff mattress staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in years, there were no notifications, no reminders of bills, no texts that began with, "Could you just—" The quiet was almost violent. I opened my notebook and wrote one line before falling asleep. Silence is also an answer. The next morning I drove west. The highways blurred into a single gray ribbon stretching toward nowhere in particular. I lived off gas station sandwiches and motel breakfast drifting from state to state. Somewhere outside Omaha, I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone in 5 days. It felt like detox. Each mile peeled away another layer of guilt. By the end of the first week, the silence was heavy but clean. No one called. No one texted. It was as if I'd been erased. Week 3 brought me to Flagstaff, where the air smelled of pine and roasted chili. I rented a small adobe house on the edge of Pioneer Lane, a single-story place with a creaky fan and no Wi-Fi. Every morning I walked to a cafe that roasted its own beans, sat by the window, and watched the locals move through their routines without hurry. My phone stayed face down on the table until one afternoon it buzzed with a familiar name, Maya. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice trembled somewhere between anger and panic. "Ethan, why did my tuition payment stop? The portal says it didn't go through. Did something happen?" I waited a moment, the words heavy on my tongue. Then I sent a single text. Thought I never gave this family anything. I powered off the phone before her reply came in. Outside, the sun burned through the thin clouds, and the colored pinwheels on the cafe's patio spun like they were mocking the concept of stillness. I stepped into the light and kept walking. That text became the fault line. Within days, everything began to unravel back home. Zach's truck was repossessed. The bank started calling about my parents' mortgage. My mother sent an email with the subject, "We need you to come home." It was long, frantic, written in the tone of someone who still believed guilt was a leash. My father's voicemails shifted from fury to pleading to threats, then back to pleading again. I never listened to them all the way through. Week 4 found me in Moab. The red rock cliffs rose like monuments to boundaries, ancient, unbending, unapologetic. I hiked alone, lungs burning from the thin air until I reached a ridge that overlooked the valley. Below me, the land stretched quiet and endless, and for the first time my chest expanded without weight. I thought if I had kept paying, would they ever have called me anything but the one who fixes things. That evening, Olivia's name lit my phone. Just one message. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here. No judgment, no advice, just space." When I returned to the adobe house, I opened my laptop to clear old emails and stumbled upon a forgotten thread from my accountant. Years ago, every transfer I'd made to my parents' accounts had been logged not as gifts, but as loans. I hadn't even noticed when he'd filed the bookkeeping that way. Now, staring at the numbers, I felt something cold settle inside me. They had called it generosity. On paper, it was debt owed to me. That night, I sat on the porch under a sky bleeding into orange. I flipped through my notebook again, writing in slow, deliberate letters. Distance is a gift. The words looked strange in my own handwriting, but right before I went to bed, I opened my folder labeled Receipts Only. Every file was a chapter of proof. Maya's tuition invoices, Zach's car statements, the Salem house repairs. I highlighted them one by one, then drafted an email to my attorney, Adam Brooks. Need to redirect education payments toward scholarship fund. Also initiate review for Silver Lake property. When I hit send, the laptop screen reflected the fiery sky through the window. The desert light shimmered across the walls, and I realized the silence I'd built wasn't emptiness. It was a border. 3 more weeks passed, and the rhythm of Arizona began to fit me like skin. I woke to sunlight pouring through the small adobe window, brewed dark coffee on a stove older than me, and spent hours cataloging my life in receipts. The folder receipts only had grown fat. Each document, a record of a version of me that used to say yes too easily. Adam Brooks called one morning. The video lagged. His face froze mid-smile before his voice caught up. "You really want to do this?" he asked. "Transfer the tuition fund into a scholarship." "Yes," I said. "Name it. Walker Initiative. Make sure the recipients are first-generation students, the kind who do not have anyone paying behind the scenes." He nodded, typing notes. "That is poetic. You know, turning exploitation into education." After the call, I checked my messages. One was from Olivia. "They are saying you have lost it. That success got to your head, that you abandoned them after you made money." I stared at the screen, then locked it without typing a word. Silence had served me better than any defense. That afternoon, an email arrived from Maya, apparently sent by mistake. Attached was a digital receipt. My mother, Diane Walker, had paid their electric bill using one of my old accounts when I had closed weeks ago. Somehow she still had access. They had not just been depending on me. They had been inside my finances, trespassing without remorse. I called the bank, secured every login, and sat back watching the wind scatter dust across Pioneer Lane. Privacy, I realized, was the rarest kind of peace. The next day, Adam Brooks called again with news. "Your dad tried to add his name to the Silver Lake insurance policy," he said. "Claimed he needed it for maintenance purposes. The company refused since you are the sole owner." My jaw tightened. He had been planning to turn moral guilt into legal leverage to build a case where love looked like entitlement. That evening, Olivia rang. "Ethan, I need to tell you something before you see it online," she said quietly. "Zach is posting on Instagram that you owe Mom and Dad $60,000. Says they helped you start your company." I laughed once, dry and hollow. Did he forget I maxed out credit cards and slept in my office for 4 years? I know. I just thought you should see it coming. When we hung up, I opened my archived files again. Every early investment in Nexora, every receipt contract and wire transfer had my name alone. I scanned them into a separate folder titled Proof. Then I sat back and exhaled. For years, they had rewritten history with sentiment. Now, I finally had the facts. Later, I wrote in my notebook, "When they start inventing debts, it means I've finally stopped being one." As dusk fell, I drove to the edge of the Moab desert. The wind carved low moans through the rock, a sound older than apology. I walked until the last light brushed the red cliffs and felt the day's heat fade from the ground. Somewhere out there, my family was still rehearsing the same story. The self-sacrifice of parents, the ungrateful son who forgot where he came from. They'd never see what I saw now. That love without respect is just dependence in disguise. Back at the Adobe, I opened the document containing a photo of the Silver Lake property title. At the bottom was the signature that used to make me proud proof of my success. I stared at it, then snapped a picture of the old wooden Silver Lake private drive sign still in the folder. That photo would later become the start of something irreversible. Before shutting down my laptop, I sent Adam Brooks one final message. "Move forward with the sale. File everything we need." His reply came within minutes. "Understood. You'll be free soon." I didn't answer. I closed the computer, stepped outside, and watched the sky collapse into a storm of burnt orange and fading gold. The desert had a way of burning everything unnecessary until only truth remained. That night before I slept, I wrote one last line in my notebook. The day I sign the sale is the day I stop belonging to them. Then I blew out the candle and let the darkness settle calm and complete. By the time the first snow reached Moab's red cliffs, the world I'd left behind was learning how to talk about me without me. It started on a quiet Sunday morning. I opened Quora half out of boredom, and there it was, a post that began, "My brother abandoned our family after getting rich." The writing was familiar, almost painfully so. Every comma, every emotional plea carried Maya's rhythm. She described me as unstable, claimed I'd cut off her tuition out of spite, and ended with a line about how money changed me. The post exploded overnight. Hundreds of comments poured in, strangers sending sympathy donations. Words like "Tox family" and "time you deserve better." Someone even offered her free housing. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then my phone buzzed. Olivia. Her text was short. "You need to see what's trending." I already had. Scrolling through the comments, I recognized the tone of a few accounts defending her story. One wrote, "His own parents said he's always been cold." Another, "He owes them everything." I knew those voices. I'd grown up hearing them around the dinner table. A quick search confirmed that the accounts had been created using the same IP address linked to my parents' home in Salem. They weren't just letting her spread the story. They were part of it. For a few seconds, I almost laughed. After years of being the invisible wallet, I'd become the family's public villain. The irony was so sharp it felt clean. Then, buried halfway down the thread, someone commented, "Didn't she already get $95,000 from him for school?" Within minutes, the comment vanished, deleted by the account owner. That was when I opened my private drive, found the folder Receipts Only, and created a new subfolder labeled Public Proof. I uploaded screenshots of every tuition payment, every transfer, every note marked paid in full. Then, from an anonymous account, I commented beneath the post, "Before you donate, maybe ask where the other $95,000 went. No hashtags, no accusations, just facts." By morning, the post had been flagged for suspicious activity and removed. Maya's account was suspended. The donations stopped. For a moment, the internet turned quiet again. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad. It wasn't satisfaction that settled in me, but the confirmation that none of them had ever wanted truth, only control. Later that afternoon, Adam Brooks called. His voice carried that amused calm he used whenever he'd already read ahead in life's fine print. They sent a letter, he said, claiming they have an emotional stake in the Silver Lake property. They're asking for a portion of the sale proceeds. Emotional equity. I repeated, almost laughing. "Yeah," Adam said, chuckling. "Pretty sure that's not a legal term." "Should I send them a reminder?" "Send the contract my father signed," I said. That evening I sat in a small coffee shop downtown Moab. The window framed the sandstone horizon, the color of fading fire. I opened my laptop, and there it was, the contract Dad had written in his own hand years ago. I, Martin Walker, acknowledged that this property was purchased by and remains under the ownership of Ethan Walker. The ink had smudged in one corner, but the signature was unmistakable. I stared at it for a long time. There was no rage, no bitterness, just stillness. Paper didn't lie. Paper didn't yell. Paper didn't forget. Olivia called again that night. "You've won a round," she said quietly. "But they won't stop." "I'm not trying to win," I replied. "I'm just done losing." 2 days later, I packed up my things and booked a flight back to Minneapolis. The desert had taught me something my family never did, that silence could be louder than shouting, and that proof, when handled carefully, was the most patient kind of justice. At MSP Airport, the wind cut through my coat as I stepped outside. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the folded contract there, the inked line of my father's signature pressing faintly against my palm. The city lights flickered across the wet pavement, and I whispered to no one, "Time to reclaim what was mine all along." 3 months after I stopped answering their calls, Adam Brooks's office in downtown Minneapolis became my war room. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, and the skyline outside was pale with snow. Adam leaned back in his chair, flipping through a file thicker than most novels. "The Silver Lake sale's complete," he said. "Funds cleared this morning. Your scholarship account's officially active." I nodded. "Good." He paused before adding, "But that's not all." I ran a deeper audit. "Remember the 85 grand you wired them years ago to save the Salem house? They never repaid it. Not a dime. You're within your rights to file a lien." I looked at him across the table. "If I do, they'll lose the house." Adam's eyes softened. "Ethan, they already lost you. The house is just drywall and nostalgia." I signed the document. The pen felt heavy, like it carried every year of guilt I'd mistaken for duty. Within days, the notice was filed. Olivia called, voice urgent. "Dad's talking to local reporters. He's saying you're evicting them out of greed. He's calling you a heartless son who forgot his roots." I sent her a folder of scanned documents, the mortgage transfers, the repair receipts, the original wire confirmations. "Let him talk," I said. "The truth has no appetite for drama." A week later, an email arrived from Maya. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." Her message was short. I didn't understand what I was part of until now. I just didn't want to lose them, so I kept quiet. I was scared. I know that doesn't fix anything. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. Forgiveness wasn't anger's opposite. It was distance. And distance, I'd learned, was mercy. Then came the letter. A physical one folded neatly in an envelope bearing my father's handwriting. "You've destroyed this family. You'll regret it for the rest of your life." The words were clean, deliberate, the kind of cruelty that passes for conviction. I folded it back and slid it into the receipts, only enveloped the last page in a ledger of years. On the back, I wrote a single sentence in pen. "A family destroys itself when love becomes leverage." The following morning, the foreclosure authorization arrived. The printer hummed softly as Adam stamped each page with the red seal "Foreclosure Authorized." He handed me the folder. Outside, snow had started to fall, soft and relentless, coating the city in white. I stood by the window watching flakes drift down past the skyline and felt an unexpected calm spread through me. There was no triumph, no vengeance, just release. Adam broke the silence. "There's one more thing. The auction's been scheduled. December 12th. You don't have to be there." "I will be," I said. "Not to win, to witness." He nodded understanding. That night, back in my loft, I opened the receipts-only folder once more. The papers inside rustled like dry leaves. At the bottom sat my father's letter, still folded, its edges softening. I ran my fingers over it but didn't open it again. Some words were meant to stay buried. Through the window, the snow kept falling, covering everything it touched. Clean, silent, final. It looked almost merciful. I whispered to the empty room. When a son is treated like a wallet, the only thing left he can give is a mirror. In the reflection of the glass, the city shimmered behind me. Minneapolis vast and indifferent. Somewhere in Oregon, a house was waiting for its auction date, and in that thin, frozen space between what was owed and what was lost, I finally felt whole. December 12th broke cold and colorless, the kind of Oregon morning that made breath look like secrets. I parked across from the house I grew up in and sat for a minute with the engine off, heat, fading windshield fogging from the inside. The place was smaller than I remembered. Same leaning picket fence, same white trim around the windows. The trellis my mother once wove with climbing roses stood bare, like it had been expecting me to come back and apologize. I didn't. On the porch, a laminated sign waited for everyone to read, "Notice of foreclosure auction, authorized by court." I touched the edge of it the way you touch a headstone, then stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. In the living room, a woman with a clipboard verified IDs while Adam signed off on the packet he'd prepared. A couple of neighbors hovered near the doorway, eyes wide, the way people stare at a distant wreck. I walked the rooms alone. The scratch in the hardwood that I'd been grounded for when I was 12 was still there, perfectly aligned with the baseboard. The red nail polish stain near the hallway corner Maya's had ghosted into the paint, faint but visible if you knew where to look. On the hutch sat the Christmas photo in its familiar frame. My place in the lineup was neatly cropped when they posted it. I flipped the frame face down on the wood and kept moving. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me to the window. My father's old truck rattled to a stop by the curb. He climbed out first, shoulders squared, jaw already set to fight. Zach rolled out behind him, puffed up like backup muscle. My mother stepped carefully from the passenger side, thinner than I remembered, hands twisting the strap of her purse. Maya stayed in the back seat a second longer, then emerged in oversized sunglasses that failed to hide the swelling around her eyes. They crossed the yard as a unit the way families do at funerals. My father didn't wait to reach the porch. "So this is it," he barked, voice carrying across the lawn. "You came to humiliate your own family. I came to look at what I paid for," I said. My voice surprised me with how steady it was. "If you had any decency, you'd call this off," he snapped. "We're not beggars. You taught me to live responsibly," I answered. "This is the consequence of bills I carried for you." My mother stepped between us, voice trembling. "Families don't do this to each other." I looked right at her. "Families don't turn a person into a wallet." Zach moved closer, heat rolling off him. "You'd be nothing without Mom and Dad." I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen. Pay stubs, wire confirmations, mortgage transfers, the Silver Lake contract with my father's signature, a simple ledger entry that read, "Loan repayment deferred indefinitely." I held it where they could see. Without me, this house was gone 7 years ago. No one spoke. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, then gave up. Maya took off her glasses. Her voice had the raw edge of someone who'd cried all night. "I'm going to lose my place at school. Could you stop this? Please, I get it. I messed up." I looked at her for a long moment. "I've been stopping for 12 years, I said softly. "Today, I just stopped paying." The lawn seemed to inhale. Even the clipboard woman paused her pen. The auctioneer cleared her throat. "We're ready to begin." My father planted himself in the doorway. "You'll regret this," he said, each word heavy as a stone. "Maybe," I said. "At least I won't owe any more." From the corner of my eye, I caught Olivia's gaze through the window. She didn't wave. She didn't mouth encouragement. She just stood there, steady, as if her quiet could hold a line no one else would respect. Bidders gathered in the living room with the bored attention of people who buy and sell lives before lunch. Numbers were called. Offers rose. The house that had stored my childhood like a box in the attic changed hands in under 45 minutes to a couple from Corvallis who wanted to be closer to their grandkids. Papers slid across the table. Pens scratched. The gavel tapped the table delicately as if all of this needed politeness. Adam handed me copies of everything. All above board, he murmured, "Not reversible." I walked out to the driveway and stood on the oil stain where my father always parked. Behind me, his voice rose one last time, righteous and tired. "You betrayed your blood." I turned back and met his eyes. "No, I refused to bleed for you again." The screen door banged shut like a period. I stepped beyond the fence and felt something come off my shoulders I hadn't noticed I was carrying. It wasn't victory. It was air. I looked at the sign tilting in the damp grass and started toward my car. Snow began to drift soft and tentative, as if the sky was trying to erase what had just happened. I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and felt the unopened envelope with my father's handwriting edges worn from being handled but not read. My mother's old line brushed the inside of my skull. "Family doesn't abandon family." I answered her in my head, gentle and final. "Real family doesn't demand a lifetime of payment." I drove away as the first tracks filled behind me. The house receded in the mirror until it was only roof lines and trees, then nothing at all. 3 months later, winter in Minneapolis dressed the city in hard light and clean silence. My loft had shrunk and warmed in the same season the way places do when you start occupying them with who you really are. Boxes from Salem arrived on a Tuesday, dented and scabbed with old tape. One of them was marked junk in my mother's tidy handwriting. Inside, beneath a tangle of outdated chargers and a cracked snow globe, I found the notebook I'd kept as a teenager. On the first page, printed in my careful block letters, a list of goals. Get into college, start a company, buy a house, take care of my family. I sat at the table, steam rising from my mug, and smiled without humor. I'd done all of it, including the last one, until it swallowed me. Olivia came over that night with a bottle of wine and a paper bag of takeout. For a new beginning, she said, setting the bag on the counter. She updated me in the same tone a nurse might use when naming symptoms without dramatizing them. They were staying with Aunt Nancy. There was talk of a move to the coast. Everyone was exhausted. I nodded and let it pass through me like weather. After she left, I finally opened the envelope I'd carried since the auction. The paper inside was thick, the handwriting precise. If you think money replaces love, you have nothing. One day you'll realize family is forever, whether you admit it or not. I read it twice. I felt nothing break, nothing tear. I placed the letter on the table, then opened my teenage notebook to the next blank page and wrote, "Love only exists when it isn't a transaction." I closed the book and left both items side by side in the lamplight, one voice aging into another. An email from Maya arrived the next afternoon. "I understand now. I'm sorry. I've picked up 3 jobs. Thank you for what you did before and for stopping when you did." I read it 3 times, then clicked archive, not because I needed to win, but because peace doesn't ask for applause. Adam Brooks called later with the kind of news that doesn't need fanfare. "The Walker Initiative is live," he said. 4 first-gen students just got notified. Tuition, textbooks, the whole thing. For a moment, I couldn't speak. He filled the silence with a small laugh. "Feels different when the money goes where it should, doesn't it?" "It's the first time my money isn't patching someone else's hole," I said. My voice sounded new to my own ears, lighter, like a room that had just been aired out. That evening, Olivia leaned against the railing of my balcony while the city threw diamonds across the river. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I regret not leaving sooner." We both smiled, small and honest. Snow powdered the metal rail, gathering along the edge of my sleeve. A train hummed over the bridge, and instead of sounding like a threat, it sounded like a heartbeat. I watched the reflection of its lights ripple across the water and thought of the candle on my Thanksgiving table sputtering out under my hand. I hadn't understood then. You can't shield a flame that only exists to burn you. I went inside, opened my laptop, and backed up the last of the documents from the receipts-only folder. The new file name blinked in the directory closure. Zip. I ejected the drive and set it in the top drawer. Some records are worth keeping.